Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game podcast. The Timberwolves lost the Dallas Mavericks on Wednesday. We'll break down what happened, especially defensively in that fourth quarter, as well as what happened to the Wolves on offense throughout the game. What needs to change before Friday night's game in Boston? We'll break it all down on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. Happy Thursday, everybody. The Wolves lost the Mavs on Wednesday. We'll break down what happened. Luka Doncic didn't score or assist during this major fourth quarter run that the Mavs had to win the game. But what happened exactly, and how was he the one that caused it all to happen? How did he exploit the Wolves' defensive tweaks? We're going to get to all that on the show here today. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, and also the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7. That is absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Also, thanks for sticking with a little bit, posting this podcast a little later today. I had some travel challenges on Wednesday. I had to catch up with the game and everything. So, posting a little bit later Thursday. We should be back on a mostly normal schedule here for the next few days at least. Live postcasts we did not do on Wednesday with Marnie. Those should be back as well over the next few games too. So just a minor disruption here in our typical posting schedule, but appreciate you sticking with the show and want to talk through Wednesday's game here. So the biggest thing in this game to me, the Timberwolves overall, I thought played fairly well, right? The effort was there. That hasn't been an issue in a few weeks. Like, this isn't one of those, major takeaways, bigger picture things. I'm not going to make a whole thing about Rudy Gobert missing the last three games and the team winning the last three games and coming back and them losing. I don't think that that's fair to draw a line there. Clearly, there's some dynamics that need to be worked out offensively still with Rudy, but that's not why the Wolves lost this game, right? Rudy Gobert is not the reason why the Timberwolves only scored 99 points and lost by just 5 points. They didn't lose because of Rudy Gobert. So I'm not going to try and draw that parallel. We can unpack this thing maybe in a few weeks. Once we get a larger sample of the whole thing, if they, what are they, 4-1, I think, without Gobert in the lineup, something like that. I'm not going to do that today. I don't think we're there. What I want to talk about is the Wolves defense. I thought this was fascinating. Luka Doncic is one of the handful of players league-wide that teams would completely change their typical defensive scheme against, right? It's like, and they're all similar types of players, Luka and James Harden, and guys that are extremely ball dominant and can score one-on-one against virtually anybody, get you into foul trouble very easily and very quickly. So the Wolves typically play drop pick and roll coverage, right? That's what Rudy Gobert is awesome at. It's what the Utah Jazz did pretty much exclusively the last several seasons. The Wolves have done that predominantly so far this year, although they've adjusted their coverage based on who's in the game, right? When Karl-Anthony Towns is in the game, occasionally, if he's the center and Rudy's on the bench, occasionally the Wolves will play high wall coverage like they did last year. They'll switch a lot more than they did previously. They do the same thing with Naz Reid. With no Cat and with Rudy in the game now, the Wolves chose to try to still play high wall coverage against Luka Doncic, basically blitzing the ball, bringing two to guard him on the perimeter, committing two to stop the ball in Luka Doncic instead of dropping Rudy into the paint, because Luka can pick you apart if you drop, right? He can get into that mid-range. He can most likely he's going to get into the paint, get you into foul trouble, get to the free throw, and that's what he likes to do the most. But he's also an incredible passer, and so he can get downhill, and he has more open passing lanes if you're dropping, right? That works against guards that really want to get into the paint and maybe aren't as crafty as Luka, or it works against guards that would rather or that aren't great three-point shooters or are less willing passers. Luka's not a great three-point shooter, so in theory you could try dropping against him, but he's such a good passer that, again, those passing lanes open up at that point, right? If you're dropping and you have your guard that's in the action is trailing the coverage. So what's the solution? You try playing high wall, which isn't something Rudy Gobert does a ton of, but with his length and obviously defensive IQ and relative mobility for his size and length, it's not a bad strategy. And it worked for the most part against Luka the other day. Now, in one-on-one situations on Monday, Jaden McDaniels was outstanding. The Wolves really limited Luka in any isolation type situation, dribble handoffs, etc. But on Wednesday, the Mavs kept him at the top of the key a lot, at the top of the circle a lot. And the Wolves just brought this high wall coverage. Eventually, Luka started to pick it apart. It started by hitting the roll man. It was often Dwight Powell hitting the guy rolling to the basket, or he's hitting, just rotating on the perimeter, kicking it to the player in the wing in the slot, and they kick it to the corner. And ultimately, what happened in this game, the Wolves had a 1-possession lead midway through the fourth quarter, and I guess maybe 3 minutes into the fourth quarter. And all of a sudden, the Mavs hit 5 consecutive threes. And it was Luka didn't make any of the threes. He didn't have an assist on any of the threes. He had a bunch of hockey assists, though, where he was swinging the ball around the perimeter. That extra pass was made, and the Wolves were laid on the rotation to the corner, which is somewhat understandable because you're so concerned about stopping Luka, and rightfully so, that you're committing 2 to the ball, which means, of course, somebody's open. But by the time the ball gets rotated 2 passes away, that low man has to come up, or you've got to X out in the corner to get a contest on the corner shooter. And I think Tim Hardaway hit one that was like in transition. And there was one other one, I actually think it was the other Hardaway one, where I actually thought the defense was okay. But I think it was the last 3 of the 5 made threes. It was simply a late rotation. And good offense by Dallas, and great on Luka to move the ball and do what he had to do. But it's the gravity of Luka Doncic, where your entire defense is committed to stopping him, revolves around stopping him. And I kind of made fun of this after the Wolves beat the Mavs on Monday. It was like, hey, this is Luka and just a bunch of guys. Well, on Monday, those bunch of guys didn't make their threes. And for basically 3.5 quarters on Wednesday, the Mavs also didn't make their threes. The non-Luka players did not do their job. They had made 8 threes through 3.5 quarters. And I think they were if I'm not mistaken, they were 8 of 33, which is what is that? 20, it's basically 25%, right? A little under 25%. And then they made 5 of their last 6 threes, 5 consecutive threes in the fourth quarter, and made they did just enough to take the lead. And in a game when the Wolves couldn't score on their end of the floor consistently and weren't deficient offensively, didn't get enough offense, that was enough. An 8-point lead, which it became pretty quickly for Dallas, felt almost insurmountable because of just how tough it was for Minnesota to score. But credit Luka for taking what the defense gave him. I actually think the Wolves, it was a good scheme, right? The Wolves had a good plan in place. And I think, generally it worked. But if you leave shooters, if you leave Tim Hardaway Jr., if you leave Spencer Dinwiddie wide open, they're eventually going to hit those shots. Dinwiddie killed the Wolves on Monday. He was 5 of 10 from 3. He was 4 of 8 on Wednesday. So he's 50% for this 2-game series. Tim Hardaway Jr. And Reggie Bullock were missing threes all game. And then all of a sudden they both made big threes in that fourth quarter as well. And they were the beneficiaries of this Luka-centric coverage. Now, if I'm Dallas, I probably have even more and I'm sure they'd love to have more great shooters around Luka, because otherwise, how do you stop him? When the Wolves tried to switch, Luka he could beat anybody one-on-one. So if you put Naz Reid on him, yeah, Naz is more mobile than your average center, even in today's league, I would say. But Luka's going to beat him one-on-one. I mean, he's going to beat Rudy Gobert more often than not one-on-one. He would beat Karl-Anthony Towns. The Wolves did what they could to get Jaden McDaniels on Luka, but he kept hunting those matchups. The Mavs just kept running dribble handoff after dribble handoff into pick and rolls on the perimeter. And the Wolves, they were manipulating. Dallas did such a good job of manipulating those matchups, getting who they wanted to guard Luka, and or finding the open man in the corner late in this game to knock down those threes. So this was a good strategy by Minnesota and a better counter, even if it took, I don't know, call it 7 quarters for the Mavs to figure it out. Does that matter? Yeah, 7 quarters over the course of 1 3/4 games for the Mavs to really exploit the coverage. Now, Luka got ejected from the first game, and he just generally wasn't very good in that game. He flipped the script in this game. Got to the line 9 times, 50% from the field overall, 10 assists, almost a triple-double. And credit Luka for just being a great player, and the Mavs for having a plan to beat the Wolves plan. The Wolves did not counterpunch. And Chris Finch kind of alluded to that in the postgame, talked about hey, they adjusted, credit them. We needed to adjust. And they didn't really in this game. Now, it was down the stretch. It was late in the game. But Dallas did what they needed to do to come out with the win. And I thought that was kind of the fascinating game within the game on this one. All right. Next, I want to get into some more key takeaways from this game, break down individual studs and duds. This episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at the NHTSA. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell, everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. Paid for by the NHTSA. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right. Additional takeaways from this game. We have to talk about the Wolves offense. I think the number one thing was the defense, was the coverage, was Dallas's counter to the Wolves' defensive strategy. But looking at the Wolves offense, it wasn't pretty. I mean, they shot 49% from the field, but the biggest problem in this game, you look at raw field goal percentage, right? Like if this was 20 years ago, we'd be like, they shot 49%. Dallas shot 45%. Couple of bad luck bounces. They only lost by 5. Well, I think we could look at effective field goal percentage and get a much clearer picture of this, right? Dallas shot 33% from 3. The Wolves shot 26% from 3, 27%. Dallas made 5 more threes. That's 15 points beyond the arc that Dallas picked up that the Wolves didn't get. Dallas also had 27 free throw attempts in this game. The Timberwolves had 10. Dallas had 16 more made free throws in this game. 7 of 10 for Minnesota, 23 of 27 for Dallas. So that's 16 points at the free throw line. That's 15 points outside the arc. Who cares that the Wolves shot 4% better in field goal percentage when Dallas crushed it at the free throw line and just simply made more shots late than Dallas didn't shoot the ball great from deep either until late. I mean, they only scored 104 in the game. But the problem is that Minnesota only made 8 threes. And this is with no Karl-Anthony Towns, and you can add in no Taurean Prince, guys that make threes for this team consistently. D'Lo and Anthony Edwards combined to go 0 of 11 outside the arc in this game. D'Lo only had 8 points. We'll talk more about him here in a minute, but he had a couple rough games against Dallas. Ant did not make threes. It was a rough jump shooting game for Anthony Edwards. He looked a little better from the mid-range, but the three-point shot was not falling. And I thought the Wolves, in terms of points in the paint, the Wolves had an advantage here, but it wasn't nearly as big as it was on Monday. I lost the number, but they had a points to the paint advantage, and they should against the Dallas Mavericks, right? Rudy Gobert played. Dallas doesn't really play, true. I mean, Dwight Powell's, a pick and roll big. They don't have like a true size, right? Rudy Gobert and Naz Reid should have been able to eat in this game. And Rudy did early. And again, the Wolves did have a points to the paint advantage, but they didn't get to the free throw line. Ant had 2 free throw attempts in this game total, which is nuts. Rudy only had 3. I mean, Bryn Forbes fouled on a 3-point shot, had 3 of the Wolves' 10 free throw attempts. He tied for the team lead in free throw attempts. And I thought the Wolves were relatively aggressive in getting into the paint. They just didn't get the same calls that Dallas did in this game. It's not 100% why they lost, right? Dallas made the threes, mostly open threes when they had to in the fourth quarter. But the Wolves would have been in a little bit of a better position had they gotten to the line more often early in this game. So again, really a chasm of 17 free throw attempts and 16 made free throws. The Wolves fell behind there and, again, made 5 less three-pointers in this game than the Dallas Mavericks. In general, the Wolves just didn't get – I mean, Ant didn't get any help offensively. Austin Rivers, I should say, was very good. We'll talk more about him in a second here in Studs and Duds, spoiler. Austin Rivers was very good offensively, did what he needed to do, was 3 of 5 outside the arc. He missed a 3, would have been a big 3 in the fourth quarter that he just missed on, but he was great. Anthony Edwards was good enough offensively for the Wolves to win this game. He just has to get to the line more often. And obviously you like him to go, not 0 of 4 from outside the arc, but I thought Ant was good. Like, this wasn't a bad Ant game by any means. He just didn't get any help. Rudy had a double-double in the first half. I believe he had 15 and 12 in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. But he barely scored in the second half. He finished with 19 and 15. So Dallas did a good enough job on Rudy late. The Wolves couldn't find him. Ant could not make threes, could not get to the free throw line, and they got no help with the bench. Again, we'll talk more about individual players and studs and duds here in a moment, but I mean, Jalen Noel rough scoring night. And no support from anywhere else. Nate Knight didn't get any minutes. Luka Garza didn't get any minutes. You weren't going to rely on Matt Ryan and Josh Bynum anyways. But like with no Torian Prince, no Jordan McLaughlin, obviously no Cat, if Jalen Noel doesn't give you punch off the bench, and Nas was fine, but the Wolves didn't really want to play him much with Rudy. I think they shared the floor for 2 or 3 minutes together total. And if Rudy's going to play 38 minutes, now Nas, who was a revelation just a couple of nights ago, and consistently while Rudy was out, is relegated to 13 minutes, puts up 6 and 3 plus 4 assists in 13 minutes for Nas. He also committed 5 fouls. I should point that out. But I don't know. I don't know what the solution is there. The Nas and Rudy minutes together, we'll talk about this on another show in terms of their 2-man numbers. Those lineups haven't been great. But it's hard to justify not having Nas on the floor for more than 13 minutes. Again, foul trouble affected it a little, but if you're not going to play Nas and Rudy together much, you're not going to play Rudy less than 35 minutes a game, 34, 33 minutes a game, right? So there's a limited exposure for Nas Reed in a game like this. And what does that look like moving forward? What does that look like when Cat comes back? Right? Remember, Nas had plenty of DNP CDs early this season, and was kind of a fringe rotation member, and we're headed right back towards that here pretty quickly. Last big takeaway was how much foul trouble impacted the Wolves early. Jaden McDaniels got into foul trouble. The Wolves had 4 players that finished with 4 or more fouls in this game: McDaniels, D'Lo, Austin Rivers, and Nas Reed. Ultimately, it didn't really impact minutes played for anyone except for McDaniels, which of course did affect the Wolves, right? Because Jaden McDaniels can guard Luka one-on-one just as good as anyone else in this league can. But 2 things: 1, the foul trouble, and 2, that the Mavs were hunting those mismatches as they should be, and getting into positions where you had Bryn Forbes or D'Lo guarding Luka, and then the Wolves would try and bring the high wall coverage and try and make things difficult on him, commit 2 to the ball when Luka had it in his hands, and then you get caught in a rotation. If you're a half step slow, they make you pay, which again didn't really catch up to the Wolves until late in the game, right? Bullock and others were just missing. And then ultimately, which is what happened Monday, effectively, right? That plus Luka just didn't play well and was eventually ejected. But there's sometimes you just get beat, and Dallas was able to get the matchups they wanted on one end of the floor, made the big shots down the stretch. The Wolves could not get to the free throw line, didn't consistently make perimeter jumpers in this game. And that was essentially the story of the game, right? So I don't know. I think this is a really interesting matchup for Minnesota. D'Lo had a couple of bad games. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Dallas, to me, they have an identical record as Minnesota. Now, obviously, they're tied in the season series. I don't think they're all that scary of a team, right? The Wolves couldn't hit the broadside of the barn on the perimeter. They had 10 free throw attempts, a team that gets the line at a decent clip normally. I don't know that they're going to end up seeing Dallas in the playoffs, obviously, but this matchup to me isn't all that scary. If you can find a way to keep McDaniels on Luka a little bit more often, you get Torian Prince back that can help there as well. And you try and make sure that between, Ant, Prince, and McDaniels, that one of those guys is typically the one that's guarding most of Luka's, most of the time that Luka has the ball in his hands. And you keep working on that rotation defensively. You get a little bit crisper. I get that Christian Wood isn't always going to go 1 of 5 from deep, and Bullock's going to be better than 2 for 7 a lot. But Dinwiddie's not going to shoot 50% from 3 against you every time you play him. The Wolves have done a good job against Luka over the last couple of games, and to me, the Dallas isn't a terrifying matchup at all. Remember, no Karl-Anthony Towns, obviously, too, right? A relatively healthy Dallas team at this point. So, who knows? But a play-in game against them would be terrifying because they have Luka, of course, but a series maybe isn't quite as scary to me. And I think the matchup is pretty interesting because they're just so Luka dependent, 100% Luka dependent. And then it's just can Hardaway and Dinwiddie make open threes? And if they do, then the Mavs win. And if they don't, then they don't. Now, that's my analysis of the last couple of games, but I just that's kind of what the story is for Dallas in my mind. All right, let's do individual studs and duds. We'll do that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at BetterHelp. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, becoming a parent, etc. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient and accessible anywhere, 100% online. Don't we all wish that life came with a user manual? Things would be so much easier. But BetterHelp truly is the next best thing. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It could not be more simple. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/NBA. /LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP, betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, let's close out today's show by talking individual studs and duds. Pretty clear in this game to me. We typically do 3 studs, 2 duds, or typically 3 and 1. Studs for me, I've got Anthony Edwards. It wasn't his best game. He missed from the perimeter, didn't get to the line a lot, but I thought he played well. 23 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds. He did have the 4 turnovers, but I mean, he was doing everything essentially himself, right? D'Lo had a bad game. He didn't get much support from McDaniels. Gobert was very quiet in the second half. Noel was terrible in terms of making baskets. He missed his first 9 shots in this game. Noel did. And no Towns, it's pretty much up to Ant at that point, right? And thankfully, Austin Rivers came along for the ride. We'll talk about him in a moment. But Ant shot over 50% from the floor, and on 2-pointers, he was 11 of 17. Would have loved to see him get to the line more often, but he made some tough shots, was good in the mid range. And, if if he'd gone 2 of 5 or 2 of 6 from 3, I think it'd be a lot easier to be like, Ant played really well. But I think genuinely he did play well. The shot just didn't fall from the perimeter. The shot selection was okay. Defensively, he did what he could. The Wolves as a team, again, were pretty good defensively, except for that stretch in the fourth quarter. So a good game for Ant. Didn't really have any issues with his performance. Austin Rivers had another fantastic game. We talked about him pretty extensively on the show the other day. I guess on the postcast as well with Marnie after Monday's win. But I don't know, it's worth just updating how good he's been over the last 4 games. Austin Rivers, over the last 4 games, has made 14 threes for the Timberwolves. 14 threes on, make sure I get this number right, on 20 attempts. He's 14 of 20 over the last 4 games from outside the arc for the Wolves. The quick math tells me that is, I should know this much quicker. What is that, 80%? No. Wow. 60% from 3 over the last 4 games for Austin Rivers, which is absurd. He had 21 points in this one, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and a couple of steals. And also over this 4-game stretch, he has a total of 8 steals. So he's averaging 2 steals per game over the last 4 games. He's also had at least 3 rebounds in every game, and just continues to play extremely well now that he has a more consistent role. He's been a starter going back to last Friday in Oklahoma City. So hitting those open threes, I mentioned earlier, he just missed that one that would have been big as the Mavs were making their run in the fourth quarter. But I mean, I'm not complaining about how Austin Rivers is playing. I mean, if he shoots 60% for 3 moving forward, I think he'll be just fine. The Wolves will be just fine. But another really good game as a legit supporting role, member of the supporting role. I didn't even mention earlier, no Kyle Anderson in this game either. He missed yet another game with the back spasm. So I mentioned no Prince, no McLaughlin, no Towns, no Kyle Anderson, which is really why Austin Rivers is getting this extra run, and the Wolves are playing so small with Edwards at the 3 and McDaniels at the 4. And by the way, I didn't mention this earlier either, but the Wolves played some really small lineups in this game. They essentially had Rudy on the floor with 4 guards a couple of times, and basically had Ant playing the 4, which is, I think they even did this without Ant. I think they had a lineup on the floor that was D'Lo, Rivers, Bryn Forbes, and Noel at one point, which is what is Rivers playing the 4? Is Noel playing the 4? It was weird. But you're missing some bigs and guys in foul trouble. Nas in foul trouble, trying to get Rudy a blow after not playing a couple games. I get it. Well, I guess Rudy was on the floor in that lineup, but I get trying the different combinations. It's just really interesting. But anyway, Austin Rivers played well. So Edwards and Rivers are the 2 obvious studs in this game. It's kind of hard for me to not give the other one, if we're going to stick with the 3, to Rudy, because he finished with 19 and 15 on 9 of 11 shooting. But just know that the first half, he was really good. Second half, he was very quiet. Did work on the offensive glass, which was important. He had 5 offensive rebounds. Second chance points were big for Rudy specifically. But the Wolves are still struggling to find him consistently when he's diving to the rim. He did have a couple steals and 2 blocks. So 19 of 15, 9 of 11 looks real nice. He's got to get to the line more than 3 times. The Wolves need to find him more offensively within the flow, right? It can't be forced like it has been so often this season, and it can't be only offensive rebounds and putbacks for Rudy. But overall, like, the impact is positive, right? 19 and 15, 2 and 2, shooting 9 of 11. Like, that's a good impact. It would be better if it was throughout the game instead of mostly just in the first half. Duds for this game, I'll give you 2. D'Angelo Russell, which is a tough one because I actually don't think he played badly. The shot just didn't fall, but it's hard to go 0 for 7 and not be a dud. He had 8, 8, and 6, 8 points, 8 assists, 6 rebounds for D'Lo, but shot 4 of 13, 0 of 7 from deep. He was 4 of 6 on 2-point shots. He did not attempt a single free throw, which isn't that unusual for D'Lo, but if you squeeze the trigger 13 times, you got to figure you're going to get to the line at some point. Defensively, I mean, like, the effort is still there for D'Lo, right? Like, he's been playing hard now for, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks or so. It's just a tough matchup when the Mavs are hunting that matchup, trying to get D'Lo on Luka. It's a tough thing to deal with. So, like, it's not for lack of effort. D'Lo was a dud several times early this season because, frankly, there was a lack of effort and just poor decision making. I don't know that was it in this game. I think he just missed shots. 4 of 13, 0 of 7 from deep. That hurts. No free throw attempts. The 8 assists and 2 turnovers is good. But like, the Wolves needed him to come to the party offensively when nobody else did. Even more detrimental to the Wolves offense was Jaylen Nowell. 4 points on 12 shots, which is the exact opposite of efficiency. 2 of 12 from the floor, or 0 of 5, from the 3-point line. So go ahead and combine the Wolves' 3 best for 3-point shooters, who should be, I'm throwing out Bryn Forbes because he hasn't been this year and plays a much smaller role. But you'd say with this lineup, McDaniels, Gobert, Russell, Rivers, Edwards, Naz, Forbes, Nowell, your 3 best 3-point shooters are supposed to be D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, and Jaylen Nowell. They combined to shoot 0 of 16 on 3-point attempts in this game. 0 of 16, which is a really tough thing to do. And both D'Lo and Nowell attempted 0 free throws. Nowell typically will get to the line. His free throw rate, he's got a good free throw rate. So you combine D'Lo, Forbes, and D'Lo, Edwards, and Nowell. They combined to shoot 0 of 16 from 3 and 1 of 2 from the free throw line. And the Wolves only lost by 5. So I guess, like, you could look at it that way. But it's also frustrating because if, like, one of those guys has a more normal game, gets to the line a little bit, makes a couple of threes, we're talking about a different outcome ultimately. So obviously we're not going to see a whole lot of these games where all 3 of those guys are, like, completely not clicking from deep, or, Edwards, again, good inside the arc. So Russell and Nowell didn't click at all. I mean, they shot a combined 6 of 25, which is, of course, below 25% from the field. And again, 0 of 12 from 3 and 0 free throw attempts. That's not going to happen very often, but this was not a good Jaylen Nowell game. He missed his first 9 shots before making a couple late. So disappointing to be sure. But again, not, it's certainly atypical. All right. That's all for this game. Upcoming, the Wolves on Friday, they do take on the Boston Celtics in Boston. Boston's been on a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, they still have the league's best record, but they were down like 30 to the Pacers. I say roller coaster. The season hasn't been, but lately it has been. They were down 30 to the Pacers at one point on Wednesday. They lost by 5. They've lost 3 in a row, and 5 of 6 games with their only win coming at the Lakers. So you can bet that Boston's looking at this as a get-right game. I mean, there were boos on the home floor. Again, the league's best teams to this point, really, certainly until about a week ago. Boston's certainly looking at this as like, okay, this is a Wolves team that just got, punch them in the mouth, they'll fold. They don't respond well to adversity. They lost on Wednesday. They're coming in 500 record, first game of a long road trip. Boston's going to try and get right on Friday against Minnesota. And Wolves have to be ready for that. It seems unlikely, who knows about Kyle Anderson, but I don't think McLaughlin or Prince are going to be back. We know Towns won't be on Friday. So shorthanded Wolves team at Boston trying to get right. They're going to get punched in the mouth early. How will the Wolves respond against the Celtics on Friday? I want to break down that matchup on Friday's show. So we'll certainly do that. We'll get you ready for the weekend, and then Saturday, Sunday off, no games. And then back Monday, we will have the live postcast. The plan is to do the postcast if everything works right from a technology perspective, with my location being different. We will do the live postcast on Friday evening following the show, or following the game, myself and Marnie. And then we'll be back Monday to preview Monday night's game for the Wolves. I believe that's the game at Miami, if I'm not mistaken. This is such a tough road trip at Boston, at Miami, and then New Orleans, I believe. I'm going to pull this up, make sure I got it right. Yeah, Boston, Miami, New Orleans, Milwaukee, all on the road, all good teams. Miami, playing better. The record's not where it typically would be, but 3 or 4 really good teams: Boston, Miami, New Orleans, Milwaukee. I'll tell you what, if they split this road trip, I would be ecstatic. And again, I think Boston comes out and plays hard on Friday. So big game for the Wolves. It's a 6:30 Central tip. Again, postcast about 45 minutes following the game live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. And we'll post the audio feed here on Locked On Wolves, so you'll be able to hear that over the weekend. And then Monday morning, we'll have a new episode to get you ready for Wolves Heat on Monday night. So big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. A reminder that you can listen anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube. You can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku app or the Amazon Fire TV app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in just 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.